"Come quiet, or we burn this house." That's what they told the widow just before dawn. But the man inside wasn't her husband. He was a stranger, half dead in the snow days ago. Until her kids dragged him in. He fixed the roof, taught them to ride, never raised his voice, never reached for a gun. Now they say he's a thief, a killer. But the papers don't match. The story stinks. And this morning, under falling snow, the town must choose. Believe a forged bounty, or stand with a quiet man who risked his life to save a child from the ice. What would you do if mercy brought danger to your doorstep? Snow fell sideways, cutting through the trees like white knives. In Frost Hollow, winter didn't knock. It broke the door in. Emma Hale heard the wind before she saw the shapes. 2 of them, small, stumbling up the path like shadows with purpose. She flung open the door just as Noah and Elsie reached the porch, red-faced and breathless. Between them dragged a man, half frozen, face crusted with sleet, one boot missing. His coat hung open, revealing a blood-soaked bandage and fingers locked tight around a curled, water-warped photograph. "He fell by the creek, Ma," Noah gasped. "We couldn't lift him." Emma didn't ask a single question, just grabbed the man beneath the arms and hauled. Her boots slipped, but together they got him inside, laid him near the hearth. She cut off his soaked coat and covered him in every blanket they had. Elsie fetched hot water. Noah ran for Reverend Cole. The fire hissed and snapped. The stranger didn't stir. By nightfall, his fever broke. His lips cracked open. "Name's Caleb," he murmured, blinking toward the flickering ceiling beams. "Caleb Warren." Emma sat beside him with a cloth in hand. "This ain't a hospital," she said softly, "but you'll live if you don't give up." He gave the barest nod. "Didn't reckon I'd get this far." In the morning, Caleb could sit, though he moved like every joint had been hammered. He said little, ate what was given, repaired the loose hinge on the barn door with borrowed nails. When Elsie's doll lost an arm, he fixed that too, sewing the shoulder with horse thread. When wind rattled through the attic vent, he packed snow into the gaps with a bucket and mitts. By the 3rd day, Emma heard a different kind of knock, a dry tap on the porch post. Vern Tolliver, storekeep and teller of half-truths, stood with a satchel of flour and his usual smirk. "Word travels," he said, peering inside. "You got yourself a new ranch hand?" Emma's eyes narrowed. "Just someone passing through?" "He look anything like this?" Vern held up a crumpled paper, face sketched faint but familiar. "Caleb Warren, ex-scout, wanted for desertion. Some say he saw too much, stole army pay and lit out." Emma didn't blink. "He came in near dead. That's all I know." "Well," Vern drawled, "some men don't stay dead. They leave witnesses. Trouble is, sometimes the living talk too much." That night, Caleb stood on the porch, staring out across the blanketed fields. He held the photo again, of a woman and child, edges frayed from fingers worn with holding on. "Was she your wife?" Emma asked from behind. He nodded. "Was. Lost 'em both in Missouri. Wrong war, wrong side. After that, I just kept riding. Why stop here?" "I didn't," he said. "Your boy and girl did." The next morning, a charred brand was found scorched into the front fence post, an outlaw's calling card shaped like a broken spur. Caleb didn't say a word. He simply reached for the axe, chopped fresh wood, and stacked it higher than before. Emma watched him from the kitchen window, her arms folded tight, the children coloring in silence behind her. Trouble had found them. It always did, sooner or later. But this time, it had come wearing boots, and it had left a man behind with eyes full of grief and hands that worked instead of wounded. Out near the ridge, 3 riders waited with twitchy horses and sharp eyes. Snow kept falling. The storm did not lift. It only changed its shape, less blizzard. Now, more whisper. News moves faster than wind in a small valley, and by morning Frost Hollow had stories for breakfast. At Emma Hale's kitchen table, Caleb Warren cradled a mug of black coffee, steam curling around his scarred knuckles. He looked stronger than the day he was dragged inside, but still spoke little. The photograph stayed on the mantel where he'd left it, its edges curling gently in the fire's warmth. Noah slipped into a chair opposite him, eyes bright. "You really were a scout?" Caleb glanced at Emma, then back to the boy. "Long time ago." "Did you steal from the army?" Noah asked, plain as only a child can. Emma started to scold him, but Caleb shook his head. "No," he said quietly, "not a cent." Silence followed, but Noah seemed satisfied. He busied himself with buttering bread for his sister. Outside, hoofprints cut across the snow near the corral, fresh, sharp. Caleb rose, pulled on his coat, and walked out with deliberate steps. He crouched near the tracks, fingertips brushing the crusted edges, odd tread, wide heel on one boot, narrow on the other, a limp maybe, and beside the prints, a brass cartridge, misfired, snowmelt creeping into its primer. He pocketed it and returned inside. "We're being watched," he said simply. Emma's hands stilled on the washboard. "By who?" "3 riders, Rake Nolan's men if I had to guess. They're blocking the road, taxing travelers, looking for me." She swallowed hard. "What will you do?" Caleb's eyes softened as they landed on Elsie's doll lying on the windowsill. He picked it up, inspected the repaired arm. "First, fix what I can," he murmured and set it back. That afternoon, Reverend Cole arrived, snow on his shoulders. He brought a bundle of candles and a look of quiet concern. "Heard the gossip," he said to Emma. "Vern Tolliver's been whispering. Says you're harboring a wanted man." "I'm harboring a man who nearly froze to death," she said evenly. Reverend Cole nodded. "I believe you, but others may not. If you need a witness for your character, you'll have it." Caleb stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Appreciate that, Reverend." Old Hank Dugan showed up not long after, leading a mule stacked with split kindling. His beard was rimed with frost, his eyes crinkled with humor. "Snow's bad for fence posts, good for hiding tracks," he said, dropping the wood. "Figured you might need a friend or two." Emma felt a small swell in her chest. Allies, not many, but enough to stand close when the wind blew. As dusk deepened, a rider approached the fence and dismounted. He wore a scarf over his mouth and a smile in his eyes. "Tell the stranger," he called, "sunrise soon. He's got till then to walk out, or we ride in." Noah pressed close to Emma's skirts. Elsie clutched her doll. Caleb stepped onto the porch, his coat unbuttoned, but his voice steady. "You tell Rake Nolan," he said, "I'm not hiding, and I'm not running." The rider chuckled, swung up into the saddle, and trotted off. Snow swallowed his tracks within minutes. Inside, Emma closed the door and leaned her back against it. "You could leave," she whispered. "If you go now, maybe they'll follow you, not us." Caleb met her eyes. "If I go now, they'll burn what's left. If I stay, we've got a chance to prove the truth." Emma wanted to argue, but saw the resolve etched into his weathered face. "Then we'll need proof," she said finally. Caleb gave a slow nod. "And a plan. Tonight I'll start with Vern's ledger. Might be more there than flower orders." As the bell rope at the church swayed in the evening breeze, Emma felt something shift inside her, fear turning to resolve. In Vern's neat columns may lie the rot of a whole story. Caleb's next move could expose it, or cost him his last chance at freedom. The next morning dawned brittle and pale, frost feathering the corners of the window panes. Inside the Hale house, Caleb Warren sat at Emma's kitchen table with a hammer and a ledger. "I told Vern I'd tighten the hinges on his pantry shelf," he said, voice low. "Thought I'd borrow his ledger while I was at it." Emma poured coffee, her eyes flicking to the worn book. "Borrow or—" "Copy what matters," Caleb said simply. "I won't take it. Just trace a few figures, see if they hum wrong." She nodded, silent approval. Vern Tolliver's ledger looked neat, too neat. Black ink, crisp numbers, freight lists, sugar orders, accounts from travelers and townsfolk. But Caleb's eye caught it. Repetition. Same amount paid 3 times over. 2 dates, same day. Vern signed both, he murmured. Noah peeked over his shoulder. "That bad?" "Means he's lying somewhere, maybe to someone who paid him to whisper." Later, at the church, Reverend Cole unlocked the back study and handed Caleb a sealed envelope. "You asked me to witness. This it?" Inside was a copied column of figures, noted with freight codes and abbreviations only a federal server or supply runner would know. Caleb had once been both. "Thanks, Reverend. Keep it safe." "You think this bounty's fake?" the Reverend asked. "I know it is," Caleb said, "but fake's not enough. I need proof. Real proof." He left with snow cracking under his boots. Back at the house, he rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out an old Army handbook, frayed, pages loose. He flipped to the bounty section. "No bounty claim is valid," he read aloud to Emma, unless supported by a sworn affidavit and matching serial-numbered currency or property receipt. And Rake's gang has neither, she said. Nope, just Vern's rumor and a mean look. Then Caleb pulled out something else, a folded yellowed paper from his scout days. I saw this brand before, he said, tapping a sketch of a double-hook horse stamp. Belongs to a rustler crew that worked trail ends during the war. Rake Nolan was one of them. Emma's lips tightened. So, they're not here for a bounty, they're here for silence. That's my guess. Something Vern promised them. Water rights, grazing access, maybe. If they pin a bounty on me and I disappear, nobody asks why Vern's. Getting richer while the rest of this town shivers. He folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. That night, with Emma's consent, he pulled up a floorboard and hid the original tracing of Vern's ledger beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth. A second copy went into a sealed envelope with Emma's name on it. She pressed her hand over his when he handed it to her. If anything happens, he began. She cut him off. We'll finish it. You have my word. Just after midnight, Caleb stepped outside for air. The cold bit deep, but the silence was clean. Then he heard it, crunch of spurs and fresh snow. He ducked behind the shed, breath frozen in his chest. A shape moved near the corral. A man, tall, wrapped in a slick duster. Rake's man, or someone worse? The figure paused, looked toward the house, then dropped something into the snow. Caleb waited until the footsteps vanished. Then he approached slowly and found a small scrap of burlap marked with a faint, wet imprint. Vern's store stamp. A warning or a promise? Inside, he hung his coat, heart thudding slow but solid. Emma watched him from the rocker, her hands folded over her sewing. We're not alone out there, he said. She nodded. We never were. The fire popped. The wind shifted. Tomorrow, Caleb murmured, I show this town why Vern's numbers don't add up. As whispers tighten and allies stir, Caleb risks daylight truth. But in Frost Hollow, telling the truth might be the most dangerous act of all. The bell rang twice that evening, slow and clear across Frost Hollow, calling folks to the weekly church supper. Snow flurried down in steady curtains, and lanterns bobbed like fireflies as families filed in, boots stomping, hands shaking off cold. Inside the clapboard chapel, warmth and stew filled the air. Children laughed near the potluck tables, while adults gathered in knots, trading glances toward Emma Hale and the tall drifter who helped her carry in wood and chairs. Caleb Warren moved quiet, his eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. Guess the stranger's staying, someone muttered. Staying and claiming, someone else replied. At the front of the room, Vern Tolliver clinked his spoon against a tin cup. Folks, he began, raising his voice just enough to hush the room. Before we bless this meal, there's a matter of town safety to consider. Emma straightened. Caleb said nothing, just rested one hand on the back of Noah's chair. Vern held up a folded paper. It's come to my attention that a man currently lodging in Frost Hollow is wanted by the Army. Theft of payroll, fleeing justice. That's not gossip, it's federal fact. A ripple of tension spread. Caleb stood slowly. You got a name on that paper, Vern? Vern looked smug. I don't need to. The Army sent word. No, they didn't, Caleb cut in, voice quiet but sure. There's no affidavit, no matched bills, and no order on file. You know why? Because I checked. Sheriff Jed Harper shifted by the wall, jaw clenched. Emma rose. This man fixed my door. He pulled our cow from the ice last week and mended the fence your wagon broke last spring, Vern. My children sleep sound now. That's more than I can say for weeks before he came. Vern's face reddened. A clever thief can still be kind. Caleb stepped forward, unbuttoning his coat. And a clever liar can hide behind paperwork. But even a small town deserves proof. So, if you claim bounty law, produce the paperwork. The sheriff raised his hand. Vern, do you have a filed warrant or affidavit from the Army? Vern hesitated. Not in hand. Then you have until week's end to deliver one, Harper said. Else, this matter's closed. Whispers surged. Someone muttered, "'Bout time." But just then, a child's scream cracked the air like a whip. Elsie! Heads turned toward the pond beyond the window. Emma's daughter had wandered too close to the thinning ice. A split, a splash, then silence. Emma screamed and ran for the door, but Caleb was already moving, hat gone, coat discarded, sprinting across the snowy ground. Without hesitation, he dove into the black water, breaking ice as he swam. He reached the girl, her blue dress blooming under the surface. With one arm around her, he kicked and gasped, dragging her to shore. Hands grabbed them, Reverend Cole, Old Hank, even Sheriff Harper pulling them up. Emma knelt beside them, wrapping her shawl around Elsie's trembling form. The girl coughed and cried, and Caleb just collapsed backward in the snow, steam rising from his soaked shirt. Vern stood in the chapel doorway, his speech forgotten. Folks began to murmur again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was doubt, it was gratitude, it was change. And as the lantern light flickered across the snow, a rider slipped away from the edge of the ridge, dark coat, signal flare hidden beneath the saddle. With trust rising and tension deepening, Caleb makes his boldest move yet, but the enemy has already lit the fuse. Wind slapped the porch as Caleb slid the sealed envelope into Reverend Cole's gloved hand. "It's all there," he said, voice low. "Ledger entries, dates, that crooked brand Vern's been helping cover up. Sheriff Harper's got a copy too." The preacher nodded solemnly. "It'll hold in court if need be." "Let's hope it don't get that far," Caleb said, scanning the darkening ridge. Down by the fence, Noah and Elsie crouched beside a tiny apple sapling. Caleb had planted it that morning, digging into the half-frozen earth with hands still scraped raw from breaking pond ice. Noah looked up. "You think it'll grow?" "Only if it's got someone to stay and water it," Caleb said gently. Emma stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes had softened in the days since the pond, but they still held something cautious, like a gate not fully unlatched. "You could go now," she said, not quite asking. "No one would blame you." He smiled, weary. "I could. But I'd be carrying 3 regrets and a worn-out photograph." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. By dusk, the sky turned gunmetal and the snow returned, fine as sifted flour. That's when they came. 3 riders, no words, just boots and stirrups and the scrape of rifle barrels against saddle leather. The one in the middle wore a thick coat and a bone-handled pistol. He sat easy, like the town already belonged to him. "Evenin'," he called, voice syrupy with threat. "We're here for the army thief." Emma stepped forward, chin high. "There's no bounty claim filed." The rider grinned. "Then we'll file one with the smoke." The others chuckled. One kicked over the milk pail. Caleb stepped between them and the porch. "You boys want me," he said, calm as snow on a tin roof. "Fine. But I ride out by morning, not before." The leader leaned in his saddle. "You got till dawn. After that, this pretty house gets uglier." They rode off slow, hooves kicking up slush. Emma shut the door behind them and locked it, breathing hard. Noah looked up at Caleb. "Will they come back?" "They will. Will we be okay?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the photo from his pocket, the one of his wife and child. The corners were worn smooth, the ink faded like fog on glass. He set it gently on the mantel beside the lantern. Then he scribbled a note, "Protect them." Emma watched, eyes shining. "You don't have to leave," she whispered. He smiled. "That's why I will." By moonrise he was gone, blanket roll tide, tracks leading northwest into the blizzard. Emma stood at the window long after he vanished. The sapling outside shook in the wind, but held. Inside, the house had never felt so hollow. Caleb's sacrifice draws a trap around him, but the truth he planted might yet bloom into a rescue. Cold Creek wasn't much, just a telegraph shack, a saloon that leaned east, and a 2-cell jail with frost between the stones. But it was enough to vanish into if a man wanted to trade pride for protection. Caleb Warren arrived just past dawn, coat crusted with ice, hat pulled low. The deputy squinted at him through sleep-puffed eyes. "You the one they're yelling about up in Frost Hollow?" Caleb nodded. "Name's Warren. I've come in peaceful. No charge filed yet, just rumors. But there's 3 armed men sniffing my trail, and they ain't coming to talk." The deputy scratched his beard. "We ain't got much. 1 cot, no heat. You sure?" Caleb took off his hat. "Safer here than near kids I care about." The cell door clicked shut behind him. Later that morning, Vern Tolliver swaggered in with a folded paper in hand and a snake smile on his face. "Deputy," he said, smooth. "Got it right here. Signed affidavit, proper seal, bounty marked." Caleb watched from behind the bars, eyes narrowed. The deputy studied it, frowned. "Huh, looks clean." Caleb stepped forward. "Ask who signed it, ask when. Then ask why a man would chase a claim on a soldier's grave without checking the facts. Vern stiffened. The army wants him. I'm just helping the law. Funny, Caleb said, voice quiet. I already filed my own affidavit, telegraphed it with the circuit judge's clerk. Reverend Cole witnessed it. The deputy hesitated. Look, Vern said, pressing, just hold him. We'll be back with the rest. Caleb leaned against the bars. You'll be back with rake and fire. But by then, you'll be the one answering questions. Vern spun and left, coat flapping like a crow's wing. Back in Frost Hollow, the house felt hollow again. Emma stared at the photo Caleb had left on the mantel. Noah had climbed onto the chair to look at it. Elsie stood by the window, her doll clutched tight. Emma traced the edge of the photograph with her finger. 3 faces smiled back. A man, a woman, and a little girl. But now it was 4 who needed each other. She stepped outside and stared at the apple sapling Caleb had planted. Snow clung to its spindly branches, but she saw it, just barely, a bud, tight and green, a promise. She turned, eyes firm. Noah, grab your coat. Where are we going? To knock on every door that's ever owed Caleb Warren a debt of kindness. They started with Reverend Cole. The pastor opened the door and didn't hesitate. I knew he'd do something noble. Too noble, maybe. Next came old Hank Dugan, who spat into the snow and said, well, about time someone made a stand instead of a bargain. By sundown, 6 horses stood saddled. By lantern light, 10 riders moved out. Neighbors, townsfolk, even the grumpy blacksmith who once claimed Caleb was too quiet to trust. Emma rode up front, wind snapping her shawl. This isn't charity, she said. It's courage. That man walked into jail to keep fire off our doorstep. Let's ride before that fire catches him instead. Down in Cold Creek, Caleb sat on the cot, boots off, back against the cold wall. He'd hidden the original affidavit copy in the heel of his boot. He trusted Sheriff Harper had the second, and he trusted Emma, though he wasn't sure he had the right to. Footsteps echoed. He looked up. A deputy leaned in. Someone just telegraphed from Frost Hollow, said you might be telling the truth. Caleb managed a small smile. Truth don't move. Fast, but it does move. Outside, on the ridge above town, lanterns bobbed like stars in motion. They were coming. As fire threatens justice and loyalty rides hard, the town must choose what kind of people they really are. The ridge above Cold Creek was dark, but stirring. Lanterns flickered along the trail like ghost light, the wind carrying the soft jingle of tack and the creak of leather saddles. Emma Hale rode out front, her children bundled beside Reverend Cole in the wagon behind. Behind her, the townsfolk followed. Old Hank, Sheriff Harper, neighbors who hadn't always agreed with her, but who knew when a line had been crossed. At the edge of town, near the gully where a jail wagon stood under pine shade, 3 riders kept watch. Rake Nolan and 2 of his men, guns on hips, faces tight with cold and confidence. Caleb Warren stood behind the bars of the wagon, arms folded. He'd been listening to the horses fidget, the men murmur. He wasn't afraid of dying, but he feared letting down the ones who'd risked hope on him. When Emma arrived, her boots hit the snow hard. She walked straight to the bars, eyes never leaving Caleb's. You could have run, she said softly, but you stayed. Don't choose loneliness over us. Caleb's hand touched hers through the bars, the cold metal between them fading under warmth. Sheriff Harper arrived last, coat flapping, a paper in hand. Circuit Judge just wired back, he said aloud, stepping between the gang and the wagon. No valid affidavit filed against Caleb Warren. No bounty, no lawful cause for detention. Rake barked a laugh. You believe telegrams over real men's word? This fella saw what he shouldn't have. We're settling it now. He reached for his gun. Everything stopped. Caleb's hand moved once, smooth, practiced. Not to kill, just enough. Crack! Rake's pistol spun from his grip and hit the snow with a dull thud. His fingers clutched air. No, Caleb said, stepping out of the opened wagon door. We're settling it in the daylight, with truth. Lanterns flared across the scene. More townsfolk stepped forward. Vern Tolliver stood near the back, stiff and pale. Emma walked beside Caleb, her children following. Noah's chin lifted. Elsie gripped her mother's coat tight. Sheriff Harper turned to the crowd. This town decides what kind of place we're gonna be. Do we let fear and old lies own us, or do we stand for better? One of Rake's men muttered, ain't worth it, and backed his horse away. The bell from Frost Hollow rang once, sharp, clear, echoing through the trees. Rake stood seething, but he was unarmed now, and the eyes on him weren't frightened anymore. Old Hank rode up with a battered saddlebag. "Brought your ledgers, Vern," he said, and dropped the sack with a thud. Maybe the town should see where the bounty rumor really came from. Vern's lips moved, but no words came. His face sagged. Emma looked to Caleb. "Come home with us. For good." Caleb's eyes dropped to the photo still folded in his pocket. He touched it gently, then looked back at her. "If you'll have me." She nodded once. Always did. A breath seemed to pass through the crowd. Relief, maybe. Or just the cold giving way to something warmer. Snow hissed where it landed on the hot iron of lanterns, and somewhere in the distance, the wind changed direction. But justice has one last surprise. The truth behind the spring and the land's hidden worth is about to shift everything, even for those who stood silent until now. Sheriff Harper's hand barely trembled as he snapped iron cuffs on Rake Nolan. The outlaw's smug grin was long gone. His gloved wrists clicked together, the sound sharp in the cold morning hush. "I got rights," Rake spat. "You sure do," Harper said, tightening the chain. "And every one of them gets counted in court. That's the difference between men like you and towns like this." Caleb stood just behind Emma, jaw tight, the burn of that pistol shot still tingling in his arm. He hadn't fired to kill, just to make a point, one that stuck. Then came the second rider from Cold Creek, galloping hard down the slope, frost flying from hooves. He waved a yellow envelope overhead. "Clerk sent a follow-up wire," he called, breath heaving as he pulled up. "Federal warrant confirmed. Rake Nolan's wanted in Kansas and Colorado. Payroll robbery, 2 witnesses dead, Army SEAL missing." The crowd sucked in a breath. Emma's hand found Caleb's. "You pinned your filth on the wrong man," Reverend Cole said, stepping forward, Bible in one hand, the sealed affidavit in the other. "That ain't all," Old Hank said, stepping into the circle. He lugged forward a flour sack and kicked it open. Out spilled 4 ledgers, frayed, smudged, pages stuffed with slips and scribbled codes. "I found these under Vern Tolliver's floorboards while he was out howling at shadows. Double entries, cash kickbacks, inventory logs that match Rake's movements." Faces turned toward Vern. He tried to inch away. "Don't bother," Sheriff Harper said. "You're next." Vern held up his hands. "It wasn't all me. I just passed notes, ran the books. I never drew a gun." "But you hired men who did," Caleb said quietly. "And you lied for profit while families starved." Vern's voice cracked. "What'll you do? Hang me?" "No," Harper said flatly. "We'll do something you're not used to, Vern. We'll hold you accountable." The sheriff turned to the people gathered. "Town law says exile is still lawful. If there's a second and a third, he rides." Emma stepped forward. "Seconded." Old Hank nodded. "Thirded." Vern's shoulders slumped. No one stopped him as he was led to pack a single saddlebag and point his horse west. The town watched in silence as he disappeared into the trees. His coat caught the wind, but he never looked back. A hush lingered. Relief, exhaustion, disbelief. Then Hank cleared his throat. "One more thing." He held out a rough sketch map. "Back when Caleb and I did survey work, we marked a rise on the Hale property. Soil felt wrong, damp under dry crust. We figured it for a spring capped by flood silt." He turned to Emma. "The thaw's started. Want to see?" They walked together to the fence line where the apple sapling stood. Caleb's quiet promise. Beneath it, where the frost had receded, water pooled in the roots. Clear, slow-moving, steady. Emma crouched and touched the soil. Why didn't Vern ever mention this? "Because springs mean water rights," Caleb answered, "and water's worth more than rumor in these parts." Emma looked up at him, a soft shine in her eyes. "So, that's why they kept coming." "They wanted to scare you off," Hank added. "Take the land without the story." "But the story stayed," Reverend Cole said, "and so did the people." The church bell rang again, this time not for warning, but for peace. Caleb looked to the children, who stood by the porch with wide eyes and wind-reddened cheeks. Elsie pointed. "The apple bud's opening." Noah whispered, "Does that mean it's over?" Caleb crouched between them. "It means we get to start something new. As spring rises in Frost Hollow, so do vows, new roots, and a family born not of blood, but of choice. One last promise remains to be kept beneath the apple tree." Spring came slow but sure to Frost Hollow. The snow pulled back like a curtain, revealing earth that hadn't breathed in months. Crocus flowers sprouted near the porch. The apple sapling held tiny green lanterns, Caleb's term for the new buds. They swayed in the morning wind like a promise. Inside, laughter echoed against the cabin walls. Noah chased Elsie around the kitchen table, wooden horse in hand. Emma stirred stew at the hearth, her braid loose for once. Caleb was outside, checking the fence line with Sheriff Harper, now a regular guest for Sunday coffee. The town had changed. Rake Nolan was in irons, sent east by rail to face a federal court. Vern Tolliver rode out with a pack horse, and no goodbyes, the sheriff's deputy watching every step. Cold Creek's ledgers were burned after the evidence was tallied, and the reward for Caleb's capture was officially declared false, stamped in red, revoked. But Caleb didn't speak much about that. He spent most days mending saddles, tools, broken fences, and sometimes quiet hearts. Folks began stopping by the ranch not to judge, but to pitch in. Old Hank brought seed. Reverend Cole dropped off a new Bible and lingered for coffee. Even the kids from town came to help dig irrigation channels fed by the thawed spring Caleb and Hank had mapped years back. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and that was more than Caleb had ever hoped for. On a Sunday, just before noon, neighbors gathered under the budding apple tree. The children stood between Caleb and Emma, eyes bright, hands clasped. The Reverend opened his book. "You sure about this?" Caleb had whispered earlier, hat in hand. Emma's answer had been simple. "I was sure when you came back for us." The ceremony was short. The vows were plain. No music, just birdsong and boots on soft grass. Caleb slipped a gold ring onto Emma's hand, thin, worn smooth from years in his pocket, a token from a past he no longer ran from. Papers were signed that day too. Legal, proper. Noah and Elsie became Warren by name. By heart, they'd been his long before. That night, as lantern light glowed inside the home, Caleb stepped onto the porch and looked out over the field. The apple tree, no taller than a boy, leaned just a little with the breeze. He touched the photo now resting on the mantel behind him, 4 faces in a single frame. He spoke low, almost to himself. "I reckon this is what it feels like, when a man roots down." Emma joined him, setting a blanket over his shoulders. "And grows." They stood a while, watching stars poke holes in the sky. Then came Elsie's sleepy voice from inside. "Pa, you gonna read the story tonight?" Caleb smiled. "Wouldn't miss it, pumpkin." If this tale of mercy, truth, and chosen family warmed you even a little, don't ride off just yet. There's more where that came from. Drop a comment, share your favorite moment, and saddle up for the next frontier story.